None of the billions that were being offered were going to the WTA. Companies weren't just chasing Alex Eala. They were skipping the whole tour. A 19-year-old Filipino had surpassed a professional circuit built over 50 years in terms of financial usefulness. Not by dominating the Grand Slam, not by dominating the rankings, but by something much more dangerous to the system. Unbridled cultural attraction. Furthermore, the tennis community did more than just raise eyebrows when the financial figures began to surface. It did not breathe, because there was no sponsorship story taking place. There was a change in power. A tennis skirt masquerading as a modest corporate revolution. Additionally, the WTA was unaware of its strategy. You'll see why the most important battle in women's tennis at the moment isn't taking place on any court if you stay focused. A particular kind of athlete transcends its sport before it appropriately recognizes them. It was Serena Williams. Alexandra Eala is now completely redesigning their marketing strategies on a scale that includes business boardrooms from Manila to Manhattan, whether or not the WTA institution approves. Eala brought something to professional tennis that no coaching manual teaches. She was born in the Philippines, brought up with strict discipline, and trained at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Morca. Her story connected with billions of people in Southeast Asia, Europe, and America at the same time. It was a true cross-continental, multi-generational story. Long before the rankings caught up, businesses observed what marketing executives covertly refer to as a great cultural convergence brought about by this combination: the underdog location, the elite European training ground, and the contagious personality. Eala's social media following had surpassed that of many players with higher rankings by the time she was making waves on the WTA tour. She had higher than average Instagram interaction rates for a tennis player. They were powerful enough for any athlete, anywhere in the world, in any sport. Companies are gauging genuine audience engagement by real emotional commitment from authentic communities rather than just follower counts. We are looking at data that prompted their analysts to double-check. Sports companies, high-end watch manufacturers, tech giants, and telecom companies with sizable Southeast Asian customer bases. They weren't just curious. Behind closed doors, they were engaged in fierce competition. Discussions were progressing from tentative discussions to significant cash commitments. Notably, these conversations were not taking place via WTA partnering channels. They were heading straight for Eala's attorney. This distinction is quite significant. The WTA operates using a traditional sports marketing framework. Income models built around the community, official tour partnerships, and centralized sponsorships. For decades, that paradigm worked flawlessly. However, it was designed for a different era, one in which a single athlete might garner more online attention than the entire organization endorsing her. Eala stood for everything that the previous model had failed to take into consideration. A player whose personal brand gravity was completely removing sponsors from the tour's orbit. Just by appearing and engaging with people on a frequency that WTA's institutional voice was unable to match, not by disagreement or conflict. There were more and more murmurs in tennis circles. Brand partners began informing other players' agents that budget allocations were being examined. Rejuvenation recommendations started to get more subdued responses from tournament sponsors. Women's tennis wasn't losing money. It was concentrating on a single, distinct point of cultural gravity. There was a name for that point. There was a backhand to that point that might disrupt conversations. And that was only the beginning. Pose this question to yourself. When was the last time a teenager forced billion-dollar companies to completely reconsider their approach to sports marketing? Since it had already arrived at that point. There is a technique for numbers to get out of rooms. They were never meant to leave. The figures pertaining to Alex Eala's individual sponsorship portfolio that were being discussed in private conversations were not minor endorsement deals. Professional tennis players outside of the top 10 typically get mid-tier settings like this. A type of financial commitment that put a player who was still rising in the rankings in commercial discussions typically reserved for proven Grand Slam champions was reflected in what was disseminated in confidential term sheets in preliminary agreements. According to reports from the sports industry, each brand delivers comparable figures that, when combined throughout numerous partnerships, created a total portfolio value estimated in billions rather than millions when projected over multi-year commitments. According to reports, one of the top contenders was a telecom giant with significant market penetration in Southeast Asia. numerous sportswear companies entered crucial discussions by interpreting the cultural imprint controlled throughout a big and growing customer population. She was considered indispensable by tech companies looking for genuine ambassador voices in emerging areas. These offers were unique not just because of their size but also because of their structure. Brands weren't contacting a team to see how she fit into the current frameworks for WTA neighboring partnerships. They were creating whole custom setups, creative collaborations, ownership stakes, and sponsored content initiatives. Long-term ambassador structures that regarded her as more than just an athletic endorsement, but as a media entity. In an interview with industry publications, a sports marketing analyst characterized the situation with startling candor. Brands have made the fundamental decision that going around the tour rather than through it was a more effective way to access the emotional connection you created with the audience. Although useful for reaching sizable tennis audiences, the WTA's official partnership infrastructure was unable to provide the identical profoundly devoted, culturally unique groups that followed you personally. This information had serious financial ramifications for the WTA. The collective loses power when businesses shift sponsorship funds from organizational alliances to institutional channels entirely in pursuit of particular athletes, singular experiences, or distinct cultural moments. Tour leadership was really unhappy with the internal responses those brands were getting. Digital analytics are not negotiable. The overwhelming finding of numerous independent commercial studies was consistent, and audience movement data disregards historical relationships. The WTA's ability to reach certain high-value audiences has significantly declined. While ISA's distinct platforms had simultaneously today, players throughout the tour begun seeing the downstream repercussions. Discussions with potential personal sponsors were poignant. WTA alliance alignment was no longer mentioned as a positive indication by brand representatives, or they were framing it with qualifications that had never been used before. The institutional support that had previously increased the commercial value of individual players was beginning to lose some of its allure. Speaking anonymously to sports media, seasoned athletes conveyed sincere annoyance. They had dedicated their lives to enhancing the WTA's overall business standing. For many, the notion that institutional quiet during a crucial period of change might undermine years of teamwork felt like a serious leadership failure that was still unacknowledged. The WTA's lack of communication wasn't just a PR blunder. It served as a warning to all of the corporate partners who are presently assessing their involvement with women's tennis that the organization lacked the awareness or the resolve to manage its own change. That signal held significant weight for sponsors used to collaborating with forward-thinking, strategically articulate firms. There was a genuine cost associated with each day of institutional stillness, and the bill was mounting quickly. Corporations never use the word withdrawal when they start discreetly reorganizing their financial obligations. It's always softer. Changing investment priorities, portfolio reevaluation, and strategic reallocation. However, the meaning remains the same beneath the meticulous corporate jargon. The funds are flowing. Additionally, it began to move with frightening speed in women's tennis. The departures didn't make a big announcement. Institutional sponsorship erosion never works like that. It occurs as a result of unresolved renewal discussions, option clauses that expire without being activated, and partnership agreements that are merely not renewed with the zeal or at the amounts of money they once demanded. The commercial basis started to reveal fractures gradually, and then all of a sudden, a number of well-known WTA businesses started shifting significant amounts of their sports marketing funds to individual athlete collaborations outside of tour arrangements. From a purely commercial standpoint, the reasoning behind these choices was simple and totally logical. Tour-eyed placement data was consistently exceeded by audience engagement measures around individual players, with EALA being the most notable example, albeit not the only one. The result was straightforward for firms maximizing every marketing expenditure against quantifiable audience response. This was instantly felt by the tournament environment. Tighter financial limits were imposed on smaller WTA tournaments, which rely more tennis sponsorship revenue than television revenue. Discussions about prize funds get exceedingly complicated. The sportsmen who would never command individual billion-dollar portfolios but who built the competitive backbone that made top tennis feasible began to face genuine strain on the organizational infrastructure supporting hundreds of players on the professional circuit. Seldom did this aspect of the repercussions receive much media attention. Eala's remarkable commercial rise was the main focus of the headline narrative. Her gravitational commercial power was hurting the athletes who would never directly benefit from it, according to the more subdued yet important narrative. Eala's sponsorship talks don't benefit a mid-ranked player competing in the second division of WTA tournaments. However, if those discussions divert funds from the public infrastructure supporting her work, she loses everything. In the tennis world, a number of prominent voices started speaking out about this issue. The tone of the conversation was not hostile to Eala specifically. Almost everyone agreed that the situation wasn't her fault or her creation. The organizational leadership's perceived lack of adaptability and structural flaws in the sport's advertisement architecture were the main sources of discontent. When assessing the scenario, sports economists noticed a troubling similarity with processes that had already caused other professional sports leagues to become unstable. Revenue distribution within the sport becomes fundamentally unbalanced when individual athlete commercial worth significantly exceeds institutional brand equity. The athletes who have large individual profiles are quite valuable. Economic uncertainty is growing for everyone else. Financial instability occurs in the midst of the competitive field, which is vital for the long-term health of any activity. The WTA needed quick, astute institutional innovation to manage this dynamic. The company needed business models that could recognize and support outstanding individual athlete value while maintaining substantial joint revenue sources. The sponsorship exodus was loudly responding to the question of whether that potential existed under current leadership. ALA was never really the focus of the corporate exodus. They served as a judgment on whether the WTA had changed quickly enough to be commercially vital in the face of a shifting media landscape. And at this particular time, the conclusion was obvious and stark. The court's decision has been made. All eyes are now focused on one particular interview. And no one could have predicted what happened next. Sometimes an athlete will say something in athletics that is so accurate and unexpectedly honest that it breaks through every institutional narrative and instantly into the public consciousness like a spectacular winner down the road. The internet not only reacted to Alex Eala's moment, but it exploded. According to an interview, it spread quickly through several sources. Almost all onlookers were taken aback by Eala's forthright approach to the commercial situation surrounding her career. She wasn't hostile. She wasn't handling manufacturing disputes or grievances. Her remarks somehow hurt more than full. She talked about representing.